Hello, welcome to Shad Life. This is part of my series about sustainable trails. And I did some videos during fat bike season, but now it's spring, and I want to talk about first how the trails are built and why they're built the way they are. So we're going to look at this section right here, and then I'm going to hit a couple other sections and show you what sustainable trails are and what they mean and all that stuff. So if you're ever out riding and you're paying close attention and you're riding well-built trails, in my area a lot of them are built by MORC, Minnesota Off-Road Cyclists, and you'll notice that trails are always built kind of on a hillside. So there's the high area there, the low area down there, and the trail kind of surfs the side of the hill. You don't see trails going straight up the hill. You don't see them going straight down or even like close to that. So there's this kind of grade rule where the trails, you don't want to go too much of a grade. I'm not going to get into all the number details about that, but we're basically only going to have a small amount of down and a small amount of up, things like that, and we're not going to go straight down what we call the fall line of the trail, because if we did that, water flows from up there during heavy rain and comes down. You can kind of see where the road's even just naturally right there, right? But it comes down and goes this way and then goes across the trail and then will continue to go down. If you had a trail that went from, say, that tree straight down this hill because we wanted to get rad and all this speed and all the gnarly stuff, that's all fine and dandy, except for when nature takes charge and it's going to run the water down that trail and just rut it out. You will see, especially if you watch YouTube and stuff, usually it's out west and stuff, you'll see these trails and they're basically, the riders are riding ruts, and the actual level of the ground is like up here and they're riding in a rut. Well, those ruts exist because the trails have eroded away over time, and usually because they're too steep or things like that, and the water runs down them, takes all the sediment away and ruts it out. We don't want that because that's not fun to ride and stuff. So the idea is the trails are built so water comes down the side of the hill, goes across the trail, and then goes down. And it's not 100% preventable that the water will go across the trail. Every once in a while, and we'll walk this way, you'll get to areas where maybe the water will start to run down the trail, but then we have what we call grade reversals. The cool thing about grade reversals is they actually make the riding more fun because you'll see the trail snakes around. This could have been built in a nice, perfectly straight line, right, to that corner up there, but instead it's built to have a little dip here, small little up, another little dip here. So what happens is water won't get caught on the trail and accelerate and continue down it. It'll exit here, and then we got another little raised part, and then another dip. Water might run down here, but then it's going to start running off and go down the hill right? And then we got another little raised section here, so all the water is going to run off here, and then it dips. Another thing to pay attention to is notice that the trail is slightly outsloped. It's not completely flat. It has a little bit, like a 5 degree or so outslope. That's also to help the water run off of it. So that's why trails are built the way they're built, is they're built so they don't get all rutted out from the rain. Here's another example after this berm, right? Water's going to all want to come down there and try to get trapped in here, and we want it to either go off that way or off here, right? And this was just reworked last year, so you can see kind of where that work was done to get the rain to go that way. When the growth comes back in here, this will look all nice and stuff, but the water will still run off the trail. And then we got another up. So you'll see that, and you can kind of almost see where there's potential for some sediment, although I think this is mostly leaves, right? But we want to prevent water from getting on the trail and then just running straight down the trail, because that's when it'll start to cause ruts. And you'll notice through this whole section there's no ruts, right? And trail maintenance is one of those things we constantly do. So if a rut does start to develop, then we can make sure we repair it and take off that edge that's making the water catch there, or figure out what the drainage problem is so we can fix it. And by doing that and doing regular maintenance, we prevent the ruts from getting worse and fix them early on in the process. So that's that part, and why trails are designed the way they are. And I'm going to talk about why we don't want to ride trails when they're wet and during certain conditions, when they're muddy and when they're soft and stuff like that. So let's go find an area where I can show you what happens when the trails are wet. Okay, so this is an example of closed trail. So when you see this doesn't mean go around or find a different entrance to this section. It means this whole section is closed. There's the exit, that's closed. This is the entrance. And there's reasons for it, I'll go show you. So up here ahead of me is where there's some significant issues, and it needs to get fixed and resolved before this trail can get opened up. And here it is here. And this is basically a rut going down, and it's going all the way down the trail. This is actually doing exactly what I was talking about earlier, and it's what we don't want. Is it's fine there. Notice how it's not rutted right here. Well, that's because water can run off the trail. But right about where I'm standing, the trail is it's insloped instead of outsloped. And so the water is getting right about here and coming down this hillside and getting trapped in the trail. And then the water just shoots straight down this trail. And as it does it, it starts causing this rut. So this is all done by nature, but it's the riding on this trail that has compacted the middle of it and created it a low spot in the middle and then a berm. That can happen by riding wet trails when they're too soft like this. And you can see, of course, even though the trails have been closed, this whole thing was just open today, and this section's never been open this year. You can see people have been riding it anyway, right? So there's people that definitely ride closed trail. Here's another section. Try to get my shadow out of the way. You can see that's that continued rut, and there's a big berm kind of edge right there. So something needs to be done in this section. Again, this is the one that could be armored, and a bunch of rock could be put in here, or the trail surface could be raised or something. I don't see a lot of room for this edge to be taken off. So this is a maintenance crew kind of thing where it's gonna have to get worked. But because this has been ridden on either when it's wet or whatever, it's got compacted. That compaction caused this to become rutted out by rain. It's kind of like the riders kind of start the erosion a little bit, and then when it rains, that just accelerates it. So we'll look at it from this angle, and you can just kind of see it's all. So if this was just left alone and we just kept riding it and nobody fixed it or anything, this would just get worse and worse and worse, and almost to a point where we'd be like, oh, let's reroute the trail. Well, then what happens is if you reroute the trail, then you're just, taking away more vegetation and doing more damage to nature. So having a trail and just letting it rut out it with the expectation of, oh, we can just move the trail over somewhere else, is exactly what we don't want, because that's not sustainable. That means we just keep, doing more destruction and taking down more trees and all that. We don't want to do that. We want to keep the trail here where it's designed to be. So here's another example of when you don't want to be riding trail or hiking on it or anything. If you're leaving imprints in the trail like this, it's too soft. And here's an example of how riding a trail will just cause it to get lower and lower and lower, and then this will become a super wet section that will never dry out. So if you're creating marks like this in the trail, do not ride it, causing too much damage. More examples. Definitely people that were ignoring the closing and riding the trails anyway. And then it creates a lot more work for the maintenance crews. And they're volunteers at this trail. They put in their dedicated work because they love mountain biking. The reason the trail's open now is because it's springtime, and this is really literally the only area that's still wet. Everything else is pretty dry, and it's probably still wet because it's struggling to have water run off as it is. So this is something where the trail crew will someday come in and they'll do one of two things. They'll either do what we call deep berming. They'll take this outer edge off so the water can run out of here, or they'll say, hey, there's not a lot, and this might be one of those examples where there's not a lot we can do to get the water to run out of here, so let's bury in some rocks and what we call armoring the trail. And this would be probably a potential area where the trail might get armored. So if you're ever riding on a trail and then there's you ride over a couple of rocks, it'll usually be in a low spot. The reason those rocks are there is they're trying to fix spots like this, right? So that's it. And it's really important that when trails are closed, and even if they're not closed, if you go to a trail and it's soft and wet or muddy or whatever, don't ride it. Don't just damage the trail. Sure, you may think, oh, it'll dry out later or whatever, but what ends up happening is what I was just saying, is you end up creating that low spot, what we call cupping the trail, because it's soft and muddy or damp, and then that gives the rain somewhere to catch and erode the trail even faster when there aren't even riders on it. And that's kind of this thing, we're playing with nature here, right? So we're trying to make the trails be able to take the punishment of what rain delivers and be more durable. And that's where we come up with the term sustainable, because building trails correctly, they last a lot longer, they're lower maintenance, and nature and the rain doesn't just come along and rut it out and destroy it. So if you're wondering where the term sustainable comes, that's where it comes from, is these trails are very sustainable. They will be here for many, many years, and probably hundreds of thousands of bikers running through here with very minimal maintenance. And maybe every once in a while a crew comes in and fixes something like this, but we want to minimize how much crews have to do that, because most of them are volunteers, and if they're not volunteers, it costs money to have people come fix things, stuff like that. So there you have it. I really appreciate your support for my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace.